Hello and welcome to the sixth in our series of sessions as part of the AI Spring Doctoral Consortium series. The Doctoral Consortium is an initiative which has been set up by DigitalFUTURES as a way of offering a single platform for doctoral students and would-be doctoral students and other researchers worldwide. It's been hosted both by Tongji and FIU so far. We are very shortly hoping to move into a different language channel to have Doctoral Consortium sessions in Spanish, first of all, and then in Portuguese, Arabic, Farsi, and so on. Today's session then is a very historic session in the sense it brings together the authors, almost all the full set of authors of the first books of AI and architecture on a single platform, which should be a remarkable and interesting kind of story. Before I introduce the speakers today, let me simply say that, that we have a deadline coming up for the Digital Futures conference in the summer, Digital Intelligence. I would really recommend this. This is not only is it highly rated in terms of research, but it's completely free. Compared to other conferences, this is a remarkably open and democratic platform, and it's the proceedings are published on Springer, so it's extremely good value. I recommend this. The deadline is coming up on the 15th of November, so it's not far away. Digital Intelligence, you can find further information about this on the Digital Futures website. Meanwhile, we have a session coming up on the 12th of November on the metaverse and the metaverse, hosted by Matias and then on the 26th of November, as part of our sort of interest in doctoral programs, we have a session on Inside Tongji PhD, I should say. Tongji has both a domestic PhD program and also an international program where Patrick Schumacher and myself and others are teaching. And I was just emphasizing that we put the word PhD because this is inside a series where we've had MIT Media Lab, ETH Zurich, ICT Stuttgart, and so on. We're now going to also go look at master's programs. So to begin with, I'm relating this inside Tongji PhD, and in the future we'll be looking at master's programs around the world, SIAC, IAC, and so on. Today's session then is part of our series AI Spring, where we're looking at the impact of, looking at how 2022 really marks the moment in which which the culture of architecture woke up the possibilities of AI. It did so for a number of reasons, not least because of these diffusion platforms that have revolutionized the production of images, generation of images, and have really been a game changer in terms of the impact of AI in architecture. And we looked at the first session in the series, we're looking at the impact of those tools. The second part of the series is now looking at the books themselves. So let me just briefly say that I'm delighted to have here as guests Wanyu, Immanuel, Matias del Campo, all of them well-known figures within the world of AI. Wanyu is perhaps the leading pioneer, one could say, possibly in the world. She is the principal and CEO of Xkool, based in Shenzhen in China, also on the FIU DDes, and she is responsible for the first book ever published on AI and architecture. We're followed up by Immanuel, who is another stalwart figure within the world of AI. He's currently a professor of architecture in Singapore, SUTD. Immanuel is a graduate of the AI DRL, and he has taught and collaborated all over the world. He is the author of the second book ever published on AI and architecture, and is pleased to also welcome Matias del Campo, who has been part of the Digital Futures community for some time, and who is currently an associate professor at University of Michigan. He, of course, is someone who is very global. His family comes from Chile, brought up in Austria, currently teaching in Michigan with an office also in Shanghai. So it's great to bring together. The one person who's missing, I would say, from this is Stan China, who I tried very hard to get him to come, but unfortunately he set up his own company and is absolutely overloaded with that work. This is the overview of all the books, or not all the books actually, but some of the books that we'll be covering over the next few weeks. We move on to the office next week, and then we've got the city and aesthetics. And these are the books that we'll be looking at today. on the far left, Wanyu He's original book, the first of the series, which published by Tongji University Press, then Immanuel Ko's book, Critical and Artificial Intelligence in Design, my own book, Architecture in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, which came out in December of 2021, but in the States in the spring of 2022. Machine Hallucinations, which was a collaboration between Matias and myself, which came out, I think in April, I think it was, in the UK. Then Stella China's book, and finally Matias del Campo's book. I should say there are other books in the making, as it were. There are a series of other books we can expect in the next few months, but these are the first, and I think this is a very significant moment to be able to sort of take stock of this and to get a discussion about not only the subject matter itself, about AI and architecture, but also the issue of the book itself. Is the book still alive and well, and what role does it play in a world where technology is moving on at an incredible rate, exponential rate, and things are changing every single day. So I'd like to start by unsharing and welcome Wanyu He to the session and invite her to share her screen. Wanyu, welcome.
Thank you, Neil. I'm gonna share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Kind of full screen. Yeah, it is our honor to be the first book, just because we started this quite early. So I'm gonna talk about what is the Xkool and what we're doing here. So first of all, we are a company established or founded in 2016. It's already 6 years ago, and our headquarters in Shenzhen. And we have owned quite a lot of prizes, but the most important figure is that we are a national high-tech enterprise in China. And we are over 100 people. And the most important thing is we are actually the first AI plus architecture company in China, perhaps also in the world, but I don't know. But this is really the early thing. We established how to combining the AI technologies with the architectural design. So our team is quite like a combination with different backgrounds and talents. For instance, architects, computer scientists, AI engineers. So there's a lot of people from different backgrounds. But the most important thing for us in the beginning is how can we understand each other? Because we speak different language. I mean, language, some are in code, some are graphics. So we are trying to mix our team in the beginning. So we started to have our internal wiki. This is our internal wiki, still working today. So you can see some of our like loads here in Chinese, combining with English. We doing this is for our people to understand what we are focusing on and what's the background of each other and what's the possibility could be. So we wrote a lot of internal documents. One is about, one part, most important part is about what is architecture? How can engineers, computer scientists, coders, they could understand architecture? And another one is, another one part of it is to help the non-architects, non-architectural background people to understand, for the architects background people to understand what is the computer science and especially what is AI. So we have these two sides in contents in our internal wiki. And there's a lot of information we accumulated through time and time. And we introduce this document to our fresh people and help them to understand how we work and how can this type of knowledge change the future of architecture. So besides this, we also do quite a lot of collaboration with the young talents, especially from the universities. For instance, we did this hackathon with the Tongji University and the Shanghai Architects Association last year. And this is also the first thing. It's the first architectural hackathon we did, and which is very interesting. It lasted for three months. It's really a hackathon. There's a small video, you can see it. Sorry, it's in Chinese, but we have over 400 people signed for it, and a team up for over 100 teams. And eventually we got 10 teams to do the final competition. There's over 50 teams delivered their work, but finally we select out from those, and those are some of the results. Especially for the top 3 prizes. But you can see here is that we are really trying to help the architects students, also help them trying to involving in this revolution of the new tech, especially with AI. So how can we deliver this message? Not just we as a company and showing our product, but meanwhile, it is important for us to make them understand what is the AI and how can this AI influence in the future. Another thing I would like to bring here is my background. I was working OMA for over 7 to 8 years. But meanwhile, I was also a special editor of Urban Architecture magazine for, I don't know, almost 7 to 8 years. So I would like to write things. And we have a lot of papers published also in the English magazines. So yeah, we accumulate a lot of knowledge. And at some moment, we will say, okay, we have those information and our internal people already have our internal documentation to understand this thing, but can we help others to understand it? Because we really think the future will be shaping by this new digitalization, especially with AI. This is the some diagram or analyzing from McKinsey. We think there's a lot of new opportunities for the younger generation. So eventually we decide to publish our contents. We accumulate to over even 4 years. Yeah, we published this first one. Yeah, I have it right here with me. The first one in 2020. Yeah, in the beginning of the year, we have our book published, but this one is a kind of an internal copy. So, but the content is almost the same as what we have in our wiki. But we also spend quite a lot of time to get this book really be published with the Tongji University, because of the public publisher, we still need to get all the images, copyrights. So this took us another year to go through this entire procedure. But yeah, fortunately, we got this book down in 2000, just 1 year later. So this book, this is 2 books actually, but this is just 2 different phases, let's say. And what is this book about? We have sorry, it's in Chinese, but we have this book, have a small indication in the beginning. So we have 8 chapters. So first chapter is about the architectural field, which will be influenced by the new techs. And the second part is about the history of architecture with the AI. This AI might be some computer scientific sense of, let's say, machine learning. There's a lot of cases you can chase back And you will know this idea is not really brand new. It's already have some tests, maybe 20 or even 30, 40 years ago. And the third chapter, yeah, I will stop here. The third chapter is the machine learning in the architectural design. And the fourth chapter is the machine learning gonna involving in a lot of other parts of the architectural fields. And the fifth one is about the deep learning. This is a kind of a new, but not really new technology we can using in the architectural field. And the sixth part here is about what is the future the AI can be co-living with the future city and the future architecture. And the last two chapters is more about what the AI leave us behind to think about. And last one is our inspiring, what the new stuff could be. And in here, there's one thing important is Neil has one interview in the back. Yeah, we have I have a talk with Neil and Patrick Schumacher as well. We have a conversation that's in the chapter 8. So that's it. This is the book. We are thinking maybe we can publish this book in English, and it will be interesting to bring our, I think this one is more like a dictionary or like the history or the guidebook. Yeah, just like the English name we gave here. It's more like a guidebook to the architects, to the young students, architectural students, to understand what is AI and what's the application could be, what's the field, and what the future relevant technologies it might be. So it is our honor to be the first. I think today we only have a short time, right? So I just have a very brief introduction. And there's some more books, and I'm really looking forward to learn those books, especially from other professors or architects or these researchers. So that's it, Leo.
Thanks so much, Wanyu. Maybe if you could unshare your screen. So I'd now like to invite Immanuel Ko, who has the honor of being not the first person to publish a book on AI and architecture, but the first person to publish a book on AI and architecture in English. Even though it's a little difficult to find, Immanuel, it was good to see it on Amazon at some point. Immanuel, anyway, it's great to see you here. I just want to thank you, Immanuel, because of the time difference today. It's very late in Shenzhen and in Singapore. So, Immanuel, would you like to share your screen?
Right, sure. So give me a second. Right, can you see my screen? Yeah?
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, thanks, Neil, for the invitation. Very interesting session that able to see and talk to the many authors. So kind of a quick introduction of myself. I'm an assistant professor at the Singapore University of Technology and Design. And I'm teaching in two programs, the architecture program and also the new design AI program. And I think it's probably the first design AI program. So you get a degree, Bachelor of Science in Design AI at SUTD. So those who are interested, you can apply and come to Singapore. Anyway, so my lab is called Artificial Architecture, and this is where I do my research and also the teaching. So I'll just move on quite quickly. Right. So 2 years ago, sometime in the summer of 2020, so I was asked by university, just to give some kind of a context to why that this book appeared in 2020. So back then, the school wanted to launch a new publication series called Inform/Reform. And they wanted me to do the inaugural issue, which is, in this case, you can see on the screen, issue number 1. but due to the editorial constraint, it didn't turn out to be a full-blown book, which I originally imagined, but more like a primer, in the sense that the target audience was the students, the third-year students, undergraduate students in SUTD. It is supposed to complement this other course that I've also created in the architecture school called Creative Machine Learning. So I saw this kind of a lack of theoretical foundation. So students were playing with the machine deep learning models, but didn't really have some kind of a historical theoretical basis. And that was really the motivation of this book. So that's why I wrote this book. And so you could see this book as highly readable, a fast consumption even, and ideally within a single sitting. Right. So although the book was written in the summer of 2020 and finished just before autumn, the online book launch only happened in 2021, although the book's already out. And I remember I invited Neil and Elisa and Jacek for a conversation online at the Asia Pacific Architecture Festival. So so as I mentioned, the objective is to bridge that gap, the gap between the technical know-how and some sort of cultural, historical understanding of these new tools and approaches. So in a way, it's to make that potential epistemological connections and using AI as a material. So so back then, I didn't know about Wanyu's book, but back then I was not aware of any other books on AI and architecture. And so when I asked to write, to invite a few people to write the blurbs for the book, I invited Neil because Neil was familiar with my work. In fact, he even published a chapter that I wrote in his book, Computational Design, that he co-edited with Philip Yen. And that work was actually using deep neural networks. And then subsequently, and also he's familiar with my work at the AA Shanghai back in 2016, neural style transfer, but none of these were published. And then I even heard students from FIU, I can't remember his name, that New introduced, looking at my paper on using deep neural networks for classification of urban objects, taken from the 2019 CAD Future paper, but it was actually written in 2017. And then I was also pretty honored to have Antoine Picon to be the other person to write the blurbs. And he is fantastic because he actually served as the jury member of my PhD thesis at the EPFL in 2019, alongside Philippe Morel, DigitalFUTURES, and my supervisor, Jeffrey Huang. In other words, he was actually the very few people in the world who have read my 500-page long thesis from front to back. And he was just perfect for this. So just quite quickly to move on, just show some of the examples. Back in 2016, I was experimenting with deep neural networks, but in the context of the AA Shanghai School. This one was fortunately published in the book called Shanghai 10 Folio that Tom Verbers edited for the 10-year anniversary. And then subsequently in 2016, I continued the exploration almost alone, because back then there weren't any really people working on it. So 2016, 2017, and 2018, looking at different approaches. The one for 2017 is actually quite close to pix, but it was a slightly different approach. We're using neural style transfer with semantic maps. And since in the book, these projects were included, but not the video, I thought I could show some early 2016 videos and 2017 video in this case, based on the image-to-image translation, but yet not again, right? And also other projects, 2018, working on the sequential models. And separately, I was also working on my PhD, which is about machine learning and deep learning. And some of the projects that came out of that PhD was the one on the left, for instance, the discrete needs, and this other one, which is a voxel-based approach on sampling, the concept of architectural sampling. So very quickly, let's look at the, so Neil told me to give kind of an overview, I think. So the book could be, consists of 5 main sections. The first section is called Architecture Intelligence. Actually, the book is over here. It's about the other AI. So the architecture intelligence being the definition of what's architecture intelligence. So some of the questions that I was asking, what if architecture is no longer only about what could be built and designed by a human? Is there any sort of explicit form of AI in architecture itself, or whether there is such a thing as architecture intelligence? And so I was asking these questions, and I then tried to approach it or try to write about it as a way to lay that foundation, and in a way hoping, perhaps naively, in naive sense, that this architecture intelligence could be a new field of new discourse, field of inquiry, and granting it some legitimacy as compared to the more well-known AI, artificial intelligence. So the other AI. So we know that back then there was only one book, the 2017 publication by Molly Wright Stinson, Architecture Intelligence, How Designers and Architects Created the Digital Landscape. But she was really looking at it as a metaphorical way to understand that intelligence. So I was not very satisfied. Nowhere in the book mentioned about try to give a definition. So I then, what I did, the obvious thing to do is to look at that domain from within AI domain. So I took, first was doing the research on existing definition. So some of them included, obviously, the 1994 book, AI, A Modern Approach, but more usefully, the book from 2009 by Niels John Nielsen, The Quest for AI, A History of Ideas and Achievement. And he was defining it as was written at the bottom. AI is that activity devoted to making machines intelligent, and intelligence is that quality that enables an entity to function appropriately and with foresight. We can see that both definition has this rather agent-centric perspective. This diagram that I redrawn from the 1994 book obviously show this kind of a bias where the environment is just this simple empty box. And this is where I begin to adapt that definition for architectural purposes. And the initial, of course, there are many other references, looking at historical examples from Cedric Price, looking at Francois Chollet on the measure of intelligence that was written just 1 year before, about other ways of thinking about AI. And what stood out was the idea of environments, the idea of a wide range of environments, and that environment serve as a way to redesign the human. And in this case, a kind of environment-centric AI influencing the more agent-centric AI. So that was the kind of a take-home message from the initial understanding. And subsequently, this is also one of the quotes from the book, that architecture intelligence is not so much about automation, but really about contextualization, whether is it human, machines, or environments. The second section of the book looked at the AI test. So we know that in both world of in the domain, computer science domain, there are many AI tests, even in psychology as well, right? So all the way back from 1905, 1950, from IQ tests, Turing tests, total Turing tests, truly total Turing tests, Lovelace tests, CAPTCHA, reCAPTCHA, Lovelace test 1 and Lovelace test 2.0. And these seems interesting because I was really curious about how these various ways of approaches try and approximate or test what's considered an intelligent person or intelligent agent, but what does it mean for an environment for architecture? And then I went about thinking how one would then spatialize the Turing test. So I mean, it's quite a short session, so I don't have much time to elaborate. You do read the book. Looking at the spatialization of the Turing test, where the kind of this dynamic interplay of different powers between the three players, meaning the interrogator, A, agent which aims to deceive the interrogator, and B, the agent that aims to help. So passing the Lovelace test, just to use one of the example, raised this issue that in order to pass that Lovelace test, which is very different from a Turing test, is the idea that the designer or the programmer should not be able to explain how the creative output came about. And the second criteria is that the programmer or designer is able to repeat that process. It's quite interesting because if you think about some of the tools that, or just over the summer, right, like MidJourney, or even GAN, the way in which these systems work seems to suggest this idea that the creator somehow deliberately loses his or her ability to understand. And that turns out to, well, at least for one of the writers, Sautois, who wrote the book, The Creativity Code, Art and Innovation in the Age of AI, wrote that irrationality is actually necessary in order to break the very idea of the machine. But if you have time, do look at the book. I will just need a second. Right, so there are really 4 main sections. So the third section, try to pull back and look at its relationship. Is there such a relationship between the discrete and the continuous in architecture, meaning the shape grammars of the discrete world of the shape grammars in the 70s and the continuous world of the parametric design of 2000 or the 90s onwards. And interestingly, there is this relationship, this shift in logic in the inner working of neural networks. So in the book, you also see some diagrams to illustrate that relationship. So in the computer science world, in the AI world, there is this shift from the threshold logic units to the connectionism logic, the deep learning. So yeah, if you dig deeper, you see that there is this very interesting parallel history. And the last section is more projective. And I was trying to somehow put together the theories from design fiction, which has often been kind of not seen as relevant in computational design, and how that might be used as a way to rethink about intelligence in a speculative sense. And also, I would like to quote this, the bottom paragraph by Adrian Mackenzie. He wrote about the importance to open up these black boxes in order to be critical. So we speculate, but at the same time, we need to be extremely well-versed in the technical aspects of these black boxes. So from this preliminary definition I showed earlier on in the presentation, arriving at something that's closer and perhaps relevant to architecture is that the architecture intelligence is then the activities devoted to designing speculative environments. And architecture intelligence is also that quality that enables an environment to function creatively with a foresight towards an entity or entities. So the major change is not intelligent environment, but speculative environments. Instead of functioning appropriately, it's about functioning creatively. And that, yeah, there are other diagrams, you can check it out. Yeah, so this additional slide that I've included is because I think this might be the first book whose cover has been generated. It was done 2021 early, and it won the Golden Pin Award for the use of AI to generate covers. So it was a project that was done. So I don't know, maybe there might be some other books that did so. But back then using GAN, and there were a number of pages devoted to the process, I think 4 to 6 pages devoted to the process of how these 700 different covers has been produced. These are some of the snapshots. So this is the other book which I wrote the parts for the AI process and the design of the cover. This is a quick video, which is less than a minute. To show that idea, you could just fast forward. So there was an earlier process of creating more data points back then. As is the whole idea is because it's an annual kind of every 3 years we produce a book for SUTD architecture department, and the idea is to use AI to kind of learn about the potential styles and visual language of the student for the past 4 years, and then create a cover using this process of learning, right? Yeah, let me just go quickly upsampling. So these are actually the books. If you visit SUTD, I can pass you a copy. Yeah. Yep. So lastly, the reflection. So I was, I think at the Digital Future, well, this whole AI thing, although I started writing in 2020, but in recent years, we've seen an explosion. Right. I remember back then in 2020, I did a workshop for Digital Future and was, showing some of these chair work, and things have moved so quickly. These are some other recent work that try to not just learn the form, but also the kind of mesh information and texture information, able to also do interpolations with click-guided process. So we see that this is moving really fast. And also, lastly, looking at other ways to with new tools. I mean, this new way of thinking about neural networks and for generative purposes is also extremely interesting. So you could see this more like a three-dimensional version. So I call it 3D diffusion house, where it's actually given a prompt, a house designed by Kengo Kumar, a house designed by So Fujimoto. It's able to generate something that represents these authors. Of course, the point is not to use this from. The point is to understand the three-dimension aspect of these new tools that may again inform or shaken our architecture assumptions. Yeah. So thanks. If you're interested, you can scan the QR code and you can get the e-version also, or the physical version as well. I think they're about the same price. Thanks.
Thanks, Immanuel. That was great. It's super interesting to get the background for all that work. Let me share my screen. We're running a little bit behindhand, but yeah. So yeah. I'll mention briefly the AD with Matias later on, but to talk about this book, Architecture in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, an introduction to AI for architecture for architects. This has a particularly kind of curious history as well, in a strange way. Let me start by saying that it began by being approached by Helen Castle of Wiley, no, formerly of Wiley. I've worked with her on many ADs in the past, but now working for the RIBA in London, the Royal Institute of British Architects in the publishing department, and she wanted to commission me to write a book about AI, the potential impact of AI on the profession of architecture. And there'd actually been a lot of books published that have kind of gone under the radar as far as architects were concerned about this, including this one. Well, actually, not so much this one. The book by the Suskins on the future of the profession, they actually had been invited to the RIB to talk about this, and they basically talk in a rather kind of Black Mirror approach about what impact it's going to have on the professions, and effectively saying that the professions are going to disappear. But they don't really mention AI so much. Anyway, I started off with a contract with RIB Publishing, or they sent me a contract, and I thought about what the impact might be, and to spend some time thinking about it, and I came up with the conclusion, and I said, I think the answer is the death of the architect. And this didn't go down very well, shall we say, with an institute dedicated to architects. And Helen said, well, for the RIBA members, could you maybe say the death of the architect ? And I said, well, it's probably going to be, I would prefer the death of the architect ! I think this is something that we need to wake up to. It's going to have a huge impact on the profession, and we must be alert to it. I started to get a little nervous because there was kind of like, they said, okay, but let's, we want to monitor what you're doing. And I felt that they were going to probably control it in a certain sort of way. So in the end, I decided to shift to Bloomsbury on the right-hand side. If this looks like the entrance to the AA, it's because Bloomsbury offices are in the same square as Bedford Square as the AA. It is very similar building. So I shifted to Bloomsbury, the mainstream publishers, high street publishers, who are famous, of course, for the Harry Potter books, and that gave me a certain degree of freedom, shall we say, not to be worried about what I was saying. But what was interesting, I guess, about the time, this is going back to 2019, was the way in which people perceived AI. Back in 2019, I teamed up with Zaha Hadid Architects and Google and Refik Anadol and John Fraser and several others, and the idea that we were going to put in a proposal for the British Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. And it was, to my mind, this was a dream team, and a real dream team. But we got nowhere, absolutely nowhere. We weren't even on the shortlist, and the shortlist was quite long. There were 9 on the shortlist. So it kind of was an indication that certainly in 2019, AI was not on the horizon of most people at all. Partly because not much had been done, nothing had been done, in fact. We had speculated about the possibility of hallucinating designs of buildings when we prepared the proposal. And in fact, what happened was that Refik Anadol did just that. And this is probably like the first ever GAN-generated architectural design, shall we say, that came out in 2019 when Refik took the database of the work of Zaha Hadid Architects and uploaded it, and in a very time-consuming, laborious process, of course, eventually was able to hallucinate a design of a building. While this seems very dated now when you compare it to some of the diffusion platforms we had, it was hugely innovative at its time. And of course, Refik has been a very significant figure in the realm of media art. To be clear, he's not an architect, he's a media artist, but he uses buildings as both his data set, and also, in a sense, his canvas. So his materials and his canvas, in the sense he projects onto buildings. And in 2018, he projected onto Frank Gehry's Walt Disney Concert Hall in LA an incredible neural network generated, deep learning generated series of images. And that was symbolically when I think architecture met AI, but in terms of actual using generating design, I think this was the first moment when we got a kind of glimpse of what could happen. And it was startling. It might not seem so startling now, but at the time, it was absolutely astonishing in the sense that out of this this latent spacewalk, all of a sudden you get an image that could have been generated by Zaha herself, and that was the image that has been in many ways so significant. So in 2019, I started working on this book. I've been writing in 2017 my first article. To 2019, I started working on this book, and I remember going to Shanghai and getting on a plane. And what was remarkable about this was the fact that I went up to the flight attendant with my boarding pass, and she said, I don't need that. Just look at this panel. I looked at the panel, and I kind of suspected something was going to happen. And they were testing out a kind of beta testing of a facial recognition camera, and they were able to then tell me my seat, which was astonishing. Out of everybody on the planet, it was able to tell me what my seat was, and I was just blown away by this. I mean, this is, it was terrifying. It was amazing, but terrifyingly amazing too. And while I was in Shanghai, when I was working on it, I felt in some sense slightly compromised, because I was writing about something that was in a critical way, but something that I was absolutely amazed by. I was also struck by the fact that it was quite difficult to write about something when no one had previously published any book, in English anyway, on the topic. So I went to my publishers and said, well, listen, can I do 2 books? And we eventually agreed to this 2-book, one with a white cover about the positive side of AI, Architecture and the Artificial Intelligence, the book that came out, and then one with a black cover, The Death of the Architect, the Demise of the architecture profession, the Age of AI. And you can see that image by Refik Anadol that was chosen. That wasn't actually the design that we ended up with. This is the design we ended up with. Well, the title's wrong on the right-hand side, but this will be the title. So on the one hand will be the white one, the angel, the positive side of things. And on the right-hand side, the second volume in the series, the devil, the dark side of things, which has been substantially written, but not completely written. I would say this is not simply about AI itself, is also about the condition of architecture itself, which I would say is struggling somewhat in our contemporary condition. Anyway, so there will be another volume will be coming out. But just to say something about this particular volume, it's divided up into 8 different chapters with the introduction. And the idea really is to give an introduction to contextualize the use of AI in architecture within the broader history of kind of AI itself, in terms of kind of what were the origins of AI, coming right the way from the very beginning, from Alan Turing and so on, all the way through to the future, what the future of architecture will be. But it's also an attempt to contextualize it within different disciplines. And so I think that the whole idea about what was happening in neuroscience and what was happening in the world of art in general, in which I think the world of art was 1 year ahead of architecture. 2018, I think, was the key year in which all these exhibitions and auctions and so on happened. And 2019 was when it eventually began to creep into architecture. But there's only one section on architecture itself. There's a section on the future of the office and the future of the city and the future of AI. Who knows how these books will age, as it were, but this book, at least kind of the historical thing, can't go out of date, and I think the future thing is yet to come. So maybe it'll hold up well. The problem, of course, with this particular book, we can't. It's very, very cheap in England. It's only £11. That's about $11 these days, and $25 if you buy it in the States. But you can buy it in England much cheaper. And because it was so cheap, we didn't have so many color images. Only a few color images. In the terms of the context, one of the things that really struck me, and this became a big debate in terms of all the things that happened on Digital Futures afterwards, is how within the history of AI, this particular moment, the AlphaGo moment, was so important, because it was the moment, the wake-up call, when everyone realized how astonishing AI could be. Well, not everyone, rather the Go playing nations, in particular China, Japan, and Korea, when AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol. And the question of creativity again came up here. I'm not sure if I use the term creativity, but nonetheless, everyone was blown away by this. And what struck me, and one of the interesting things that came out of the book itself, the research, was how this was actually replicated, in a sense, by certainly the early versions of SpaceMaker AI, where basically the system was able to come up with solutions that no architect would have thought about. A room full of experienced architects, and SpaceMaker produces an option that actually makes complete sense, but no one would have thought about. And suddenly, of course, you begin to see the echoes of AlphaGo in that particular kind of set question. But there was also another issue that Harvard Hoagland raised, which I thought also was a huge kind of shock to me in some ways, or this is what came out of the research, the idea that actually developers were asking their architects to use SpaceMaker. Why? Because it would guarantee the return on investment, of course, but I also suspect that maybe in terms of professional indemnity insurance, we'll all be having to use this because it will be a kind of safety check, as it were. But these kind of comments kind of pointed me towards what I thought the real potential of what's going to happen in terms of the future of architecture. And of course, what's happened since then has been the development of the diffusion platforms. Had they been around, I think we would have been able to include certain illustrations that would be much more convincing to the general public. And of course, architects are visual creatures. We need to see evidence of something. So I only wish that maybe diffusion platforms had become before, because the shift from the left-hand side, the first ever image, to the kind of thing that anyone can generate in the space of a few minutes, that is not only much higher definition in terms of its resolution, but also requires no computational background, and it's really kind of democratizes things. But that shift has been very significant. And that's not something, of course, that I had in the book. The book is, I'm revising the book for the Chinese translation, but the book is focusing on GANs, primarily GANs, and the visualization of images. It doesn't deal with the question of performance possibly as much as it should be, but it does sort of state that this is going to be the key issue in the future. But it's left me thinking about, well, how okay, so these ended up the kind of the conclusions these were the conclusions that I ended up with in terms of the book itself. Much of it is, I think, is fairly self-evident. I've slightly modified this for the Chinese translation because my predictions, if things are happening much quicker than I'd imagined. AI will become part of the curriculum of every school of architecture. I think it already is in some sense, and it'll be more explicitly part of it. The more advanced AI becomes, the easier it will be to use. That's so clear from the diffusion platforms. Architects will use AI for inspiration and become experts in writing good prompts for AI. That's obviously the case, I think, using diffusion models again. All buildings will become intelligent. I think that's obvious itself. Cities will be controlled by AI. I was referring here to City Brain, the use of an AI-based digital twin in China to solve all the traffic problems and to get emergency vehicles to accidents quicker and so on and so on. Facial recognition will mean that we no longer need passports, keys, credit cards, or cash. It's not really an architectural question, but it's very self-evident. In China, you can pay for things through facial recognition. And I entered the States this last time I came in through facial recognition. I didn't even show my passport. So that's clearly the way things are going. Initial resistance to AI will fade as AI becomes an indispensable, invisible assistant for architects. I say this because I was a student at Cambridge during the 80s when we had a huge resistance to computation, which eventually faded. You can't exist without computation. Clients will also insist on their architects using AI. That's a comment that comes from Harvard Hoagland. I wonder whether professional indemnity insurance won't insist that architects use AI. The entire design process will become seamless and automated, incorporating all codes, cost, and performance requirements. Well, we know the kind of software that Wanyu and others are kind of working on will eventually be able to deliver that. And the AI will be able to generate detailed architectural designs completely autonomously, the final sort of comment. And that itself is amazing, astonishing. You can do that. But in that also, I say that I think there is the seed of something else. So in a way, that is the kind of the end of the first book, but also the starting point for the second book, because once you're in this situation, you kind of, it's the amazing capability of AI. It is also part of the problem. It's terrifyingly good. So this kind of yin-yang image, which I've often shown, which you can see in the Korean flag, you can see how the white of the yin-yang has a black in it, and the black has a white thing. What I'm trying to say is the seed of the dark side of AI is its very capability, and that's the kind of reference I referred to. So the next book, well, not the next book, I'm working on a couple of others, one with Wanyu as well, and Daniel Bolajan and Theodoros Galanis, which is going to be called the AI Design Revolution. And then eventually I'll be working on the Death of the Architect, which I have to say is a kind of project which has kind of come a little closer in the last few weeks with the development of diffusion models. I think that we began to realize really how amazing these technologies can be. So let me hand over to Matias. Welcome, Matias. Matias, as I mentioned, is a professor at Michigan, and he is a kind of global architect, shall we say, operating all around the world. Matias, welcome.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, let me just share my screen. Let me see for a second. Yeah, you should be seeing my screen. Yes. Are you? Okay, I assume yes. Okay. So thank you very much for the opportunity to do a little presentation about my book, Neural Architecture, Design and Artificial Intelligence, for the Digital Futures Doctoral Consortium. You probably don't hear the video, but I think that's fine. I want to say that the book was originally intended to be published early this year. It was finished already last year in 2021. That's also why several of the topics that are currently so hot are not included, like with many other books. Books are long-term projects. They take time to do. It's not a social media posting. And so what is important to me to say about the book is I wanted to show you the book rather as a physical artifact rather than a lecture, so to speak, and maybe talk a little bit about the topics that interested me while developing and working on the book. The precedent for the book were several papers that were written between 2017 and 2020. They basically created the background for what I wanted to talk about in this book. Taking examples that really emerged in other areas of computational design and architecture. Maybe to give a little introduction to who I am. I mean, it was mentioned before already, I'm Associate Professor for Architecture at Taubman College for Architecture and Urban Planning. And I also run the ARI laboratory at Taubman College, the Laboratory for Architecture and Artificial Intelligence, which is a collaboration between architecture, computer science, robotics, and data science. The book includes a variety of different aspects, like you just saw, the aspects of AI in architecture. the aesthetics of neural networks, the ways how they basically influence what we do as designers. And it also presents neural architecture, or the working with AI in architecture, as a new paradigm in architectural design that is pushing away several others that we've experienced in the early 21st century. It combines basically theoretical aspects of what it means to work with neural networks in architecture design with some built or designed examples, such as the robot garden, which was the first, as to my knowledge, the first built object that included a variety of different design methods derived from machine vision and machine learning on a built project. So in that extent, it's the first literally post-human design that was built. The robot garden, just so you know, is a testing ground for robots for the University of Michigan, and it was developed together with Alexander Carlson, who at the time was a PhD student of robotics, and included a variety of machine hallucination methods, deep dreaming. It had also neural style transfer was involved, 2D to 3D style transferring. So we combined a variety of methods that we were exploring at the time to come up with a design for the project. It talks also about architecture's empathy towards images and representation. So architecture is a very strong visual tradition, and in that extent, the whole development we've seen throughout the last couple of years, which was so image strong, of course, it's understandable why it had such a resonance in architecture circles. It is important also to understand how basically machines observe the world and how to see them in order for them to learn about architectural features. This is how we basically can implement knowledge that exists in our own history as architecture discipline to generate hopefully solutions for the future future architectural problems. So it's really like learning from the data points that we have, interrogating the latent space between those, and understanding that what we observe in the latent space might help us in propelling some architectural ideas. The book also includes a variety of short technical explanations. I don't go too much into detail in this book about the technological part of it. There's another book coming out late this year that will be more detailed in that area, but rather really tries to interrogate what it means for the architecture discipline when machines basically can hallucinate architecture. Alexa Carlson, Sandra Manninger, and myself wrote a paper previously to this book, which dealt with the aspects of machines hallucinating architecture that also included a large section on the mathematics behind it. What is also interesting to me in the book is the question of style. I know this is sort of like a provocative term specifically for Neil when it is about talking about style, but you have to understand that style is a term that is very charged in architecture. Yes, we all know that. But style, for example, has a completely different meaning when it is about computer science. So I try in this article, in this part of the book, to explain the two directions of how two disciplines are observing the same term, and how our loaded history basically helps us to understand maybe our own trajectory to the future. As an in-between here, this was in the book by coincidence. This was probably the first exhibition that was dealing with diffusion models and diffusion imagery in Austin, Texas, and it was a really interesting exhibition. So as you can see, some of the more general conversations in the book discuss also specifically in this chapter about style, how aesthetic considerations are also influenced by technological means. And this is very much true for what we see currently also in diffusion models, but also in the work with generative adversarial networks, because of course the way you put together a data set will influence how the result will come out. Some considerations here about creativity and AI, for example, discussing the famous Bob and Ellis experiments and discussing whether this is proof of creativity or not, but also trying to figure out like where other aspects are about creativity and AI. Neil briefly mentioned also AlphaGo. It's also discussed in this book. It's very clear that this had a big impact into the community of architects thinking about problems of AI and architecture. So the famous Move 37 here, just to keep it short. some cursory latent space considerations. This is where I discuss what I was talking about before, about the latent space and how it basically allows us to see things that we didn't know before. The chapter talking architecture is basically like an example of a very early application of text to image algorithms in order to generate imagery for a competition. So before there were diffusion models, there were things like attentional GANs that already worked with things like text to image conversion. And we used those in a competition in Shenzhen, China for a high school project. It was a very interesting proof of concept project for us, where we used the strange abstract possibilities of this attentional GAN to create images based on text. And the text prompts were basically a combination of programmatic points needed in competition with some abstract or surreal text parts to get into provocative imagery that will allow us to continue the work on the competition. We also learned in this competition how much it is necessary still to manipulate as a human the result in order to get to a project that becomes a representation of a buildable project. Because this chapter is about language, some of the parts that are right at the end, which discuss, for example, the aspects of authorship and language by Roland Barthes, or also by Michel Foucault, are still usable these days when considering diffusion models. So some of the things that are written here about text still apply to what we're seeing currently developing and evolving. How machines learn to plan is a really interesting question and a problem, because actually there's one of the things I heard recently from computer science is that machines cannot learn to plan. But I think, again, there's like a differentiation between what we as architects understand under a plan and what maybe more commonly is understood as a plan, which of course needs intentionality, which is a thing that is a bit hard to achieve currently with any form of neural network. But making a machine understand what the constituent parts of a plan are, which kind of semantic information is present there, could help us to really use these fantastic tool sets to interrogate possibilities for architectural design, not only in terms of the model, not only in terms of its aesthetics, but also very much in terms of the ways how to use architecture. So maybe estranging the plan in a good way in order to understand that there's other possibilities to use architecture, and that we, with the help of artificial intelligence, will be able to discover these possibilities for future projects. This is we had fun doing this. Like, for example, this was an example of doing plans on the moon, cities on the moon, which is, of course, the neural network first has to learn the constituent parts of cities before it can actually generate anything. Well, it's not true. It could also generate things that that do not have any semantic meaning, which of course happens more often than not, right? For example, if you generate plans like these ones here, they look like convincing, interesting cities. They look like interesting agglomerations of habitable structures, but in fact, they make no sense whatsoever in terms of its practicality. So it gives us an aesthetic vision of what possibly could be a city, but it does not have any semantic information in it that actually creates a really interesting city model that understands what density is, what streets are, and so on. And finally, there is a chapter that interrogates possibilities to use 3D models in a generative adversarial network. As I said, this was all pre-diffusion models. So as also mentioned by Neil, there were a lot of works happening around generative adversarial networks. And we were working together with Professor Justin Johnson, who is a specialist on 3D models and AI from the University of Michigan, in order to understand how we can basically create a data set of 3D models and apply them to a GAN so that we can create a 3D GAN. In this chapter, there's also like a lot of definitions going on about what we mean by authorship, agency, and sensibility in the context of neural networks. So this image here is a part of a data set that I created in the summer of 2020. So if somebody asks me what I was doing during the first wave of the pandemic, I was sitting at home doing 3D models and labeling them by hand, as you see here in the next table, in order to train a 3D neural network to create models. And the experiment was, can it capture my sensibility? And it seems, I would say that it was successful. And the book ends with a chapter on the politics of neural architecture and artificial intelligence that basically discusses the ethical implications of what it means to work with these novel tool sets. What does it mean when we have things like racial bias, cultural bias present in data sets, and how much they basically influence the results that come out of what we're trying to do with these neural networks. And also tries to understand that there is, of course, going to be a massive change in a variety of areas that, for example, use low-skilled labor. What happens if we really have to deal with low-skilled labor and a change in our political landscape and economical landscape based on these novel models? Because it will affect architecture also in that extent, not only in terms of aesthetics or agency or theoretical implications, but it will influence it also very much in its very pragmatic, simple like areas that we probably don't even consider that much in our conversations on AI and architecture so far, but definitely will become part of the conversation or are already starting to become of the conversation. I see that, for example, in the work of my students. And the last sentence in the book is, a new tradition in architecture emerges. And I think that's what we're currently seeing happening, proven also by events like this get together to discuss the first couple of books on AI and architecture. So just to round it up and to finish my conversation, just the last week, we had the book launch at the University of Michigan at Taubman College, with the launch of an exhibition that basically shows a variety of different projects that were all dealing with AI and architecture in a variety of roles. You see also in this exhibition already a lot of examples that are dealing with diffusion models, of course. And we also had a symposium with, you see here, of course, also Immanuel, Kyle Steinfeld, Daniel Bolochan, Benjamin Enemoser, Sandra Manninger, many more like Phil Bernstein, Sophia Brückner, Catherine Griffiths. It was a whole day of conversations and discussions about the aspects of AI and architecture and how they influence our production. Okay, and with this, I would like to end for now, because the next part would be actually my my part about the AD machine hallucinations.
Okay, let me just, we could either go, I could go on or you could go on. Let me go on next, and then you could give you a break. Just this was it's maybe I'll try and keep it very short because we've already taken quite a lot of time. Yeah, just to, this is a very interesting project in the sense of a bit like what I was saying before. The initial reception to these ideas in architecture was, it was almost barren ground. No one seemed to be interested in this thing. Matias initially made an approach to Neil Spiller of AD about doing AD on this on this topic, and was turned down. I joined forces with Matias and eventually managed to persuade Neil Spiller to do something. I would say, albeit somewhat reluctantly, but we managed to get this thing off the ground, which was, I think, great. And so this was, in many ways, obviously the AD is slightly different to standard books in the sense that it's primarily images, and the texts are very short, 2,000 words for the longest possible text, which is not a lot. But I think one thing that it does have is that it is very well illustrated. So on the one hand, the text is a little bit skimpy, shall we say, but it does have a lot of interesting visual material. Possibly the real limitation, I think, of all books, I mean, there are many limitations in some senses, but one of the big things is that when you're dealing with AI, you can't really show any of the videos. And this is the video that we all know very well now, the Deep Himmelblau project by Corp Himmelblau, which Daniel Bolochan was behind. And this was, of course, the video that gave us the image on the front cover of the book itself. I just wish there was a way in which we could not only have books that were kind of updated continually, but also with videos included, because somehow you will never get across the dynamic potential of what these models can do with static images. But alongside that, in the book itself, we were able to open up and bring in people from all over the world, literally all over the world. This is the work of Edward Hyman, his Endless Skyscraper, which in a sense it also pointed out how people are beginning to kind of hybridize these tools and use them with other tools. So it's not just straight AI, but it's AI being used in conjunction with other forms of software tools. Also, I mean, this was another project which I think looks much far better in video format. The new Campo project that came out of SciArc, which was with Casey Ream, Damian Jovanovic, and others in this collaboration, where they were kind of beginning to envisage the possibility of three-dimensionalizing this kind of landscape in a very novel and creative way. It's not just simply a question of whether AI can be creative or not, which remains, of course, a very controversial question, but also the creative ways in which you can use these tools along with other tools to generate new possibilities. And it seems to me that what they're doing, what they did a while back, as real pioneers in many ways in the field, is now being kind of replicated again. And as AI becomes more popular, we're seeing this kind of huge kind of invention of what you might do with AI and so on. So that was one of the kind of and I could show many more videos, but I won't, just to keep things short. Except I do want to mention one briefly. In my particular article, we referred to Memo Acton. I referred to Memo Acton, who of course was on this series not so long ago. And Memo had been a very crucial person in the sense that he not only does he know about the technology, he's an expert on AI, but also he's a real polymath, and he was engaging and talking about these things in terms of kind of the link with neuroscience, and talking about how the way that we look at the world, we are trained to see the world, much like a neural network is. In fact, he uses an example of a neural network that is being used as a kind of lens to look at the world. So on the left-hand side, you get some pieces of cloth, and then on the right-hand side, you can see that there's a neural network that's been trained on the ocean that reads the ocean into everything that it sees. And there are several other examples in this series. Here he's kind of putting his charger for his phones, and it's reading those as rocks. And this opens up a whole sort of kind of interesting kind of connection with the work of Anil Seth, who speaks about how we look at the world through a form of controlled hallucination. The question that I addressed in this article really was whether we could see connections between a term that literally has the same letters but has different meanings in different contexts, and whether we could use this as a way of thinking about how architects see the world. So here you see another neural network trained obviously on a fire that is kind of interpreting the image on the left-hand side through this lens and seeing it seeing it as a kind of as fire. To my mind, this is absolutely fascinating. And I think Memo is ahead of the field in many ways in trying to think through the kind of the theories of AI and what it might mean in terms of broader context. I then took this with my students, and we began to explore the possibility of what we called architecturalization. In other words, whether we could sort of read into this something similar to what happens with architects. In other words, to say that architects are actually trained, much like a neural network, to see the world in a certain way. On the left-hand side, Fernando Salcedo's T-shirt. On the right-hand side, you can see what happens when you see that video through the lens of AI, and it reads that has been trained on a particular project by Zahedid architects in Saudi Arabia, and the crumpled T-shirt turns into a form of architecture. Or in this case, it's another version of this where it's trained on generic buildings, modernist building in downtown Miami, whereby a tie on the left-hand side gets interpreted as a tower block. And the argument I'm kind of making is saying, well, we think we're creative, but aren't we simply being trained in many ways to see the world in certain ways? And this concept of architecturalization, which applies not just to physical forms, and you think of how Jorn Utzon, for example, might have taken the billowing sails of the yachts in the harbour of Sydney as an inspiration for his design for Sydney Opera House, but also about the way we are inspired by the world around us. And what is that process whereby we take these forms from outside world and read them as architectural forms? Well, that's one part of it, but there's also another part of it, which I was trying to argue in this article, to say that We also do this with kind of concepts. In other words, we see a concept in Deleuze, the fold, and automatically architects have this almost like knee-jerk reaction to think of the fold in architectural terms. Deleuze was not referring to any architectural forms at all. He was talking about philosophical concepts. And same, of course, goes to the term deconstruction, coined by Derrida, that was misinterpreted by architects, was referring to some form of construction and therefore architecture. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we can, I think there's a whole new terrain that is opening up in terms of the kind of the advent of AI, which is not just about the kind of the form, but the theories of AI itself. And I think that neuroscience and AI are coming together in a very interesting constellation. We're seeing a whole series of new debates opening up, and I simply referred to the previous Doctoral Consortium series that we did on AI, neuroscience, and architecture. With that, I will stop my my screen share and pass over to Matias. Matias.
Yes, let me find the screen share here. Oh, got it. Okay, I'm going to try to keep this short. Basically, yeah, Neil already alluded to the beginning of this edition of AD, where we basically tried both to convince the editors of AD from both sides to get it done. It took a little while to convince them, but by now that is done. So basically, the whole edition has tried to create the framework around the conversation between a variety of different people involved at the time already in AI and architecture, but also to involve, as also Neil alluded to, artists into this whole conversation to basically create a cultural framework around the problem of AI and architecture. So not seeing it from just the pragmatic part, but also from its artistic side, or as I like to describe this rather as the wicked and the tame problem, when the tame problem is the concepts of optimization and floor plan optimization, material optimization, etc., versus the wicked problem that really discusses things like agency, authorship, sensibility, aesthetics, etc., etc. So there's like a whole set of possible ways to describe this problem from a variety of different lenses. I'm also happy that we were able to include some student work from Tubman College and other schools that were already dealing with this problem of AI. Oh, and because I see here also Lev Menovic's article, he was also the keynote speaker of the Neural Architecture Symposium last week, really doing a wonderful frame for the work that is being discussed, as much as in this AD, as well as in the books that we're seeing here today. So there's like a lot of relationships between all of these books and all of the players involved. You see here Immanuel, for example, you saw at the beginning Daniel Bolochan, and you see that there's like a whole set of people working on this. By today, this AD would look probably very different, because the amount of players, the amount of quality, the amount of conversation has really exploded in the last 2 years, I would say, and specifically has exploded over summer this year, when for the first time in this short history of AI and architecture, a tool was available that pretty much every architect can use, because it's really just image prompting. So no need to be able to program or even understand the neuroscientific background of the work. But nonetheless, I think it's very important to understand that we are experiencing this moment where all these topics are coming into the mainstream, and I'm very curious to look forward to new publications that are going to emerge in the upcoming time. Thank you.
Thanks, Matias. So I just wanted to mention that I think Matias has already mentioned the fact that Lev Menovich is here. I think we've actually got a pretty good, interesting group today, which is including not just Lev, but Daniel Escobar, who is one of the leaders from Peru. We have Harith from Baghdad. It's always great to see you, Harith. Vasco from Bangladesh, along with a number of other individuals. And it's great to be able to have a discussion here. So I wanted to maybe sort of I think a number of issues that came out of that discussion, which actually I thought were absolutely fascinating. And one is the fact that we're all kind of operating in our kind of silos, as it were, possibly unaware to some extent of what was going on as well, because it wasn't published as such. I think one of the key issues, though, to really people who have not published things so much as to say something about the publishing world, and that is to say that it takes a long time to publish a book, right? I mean, in the case of Neil Spiller, that was kind of like, I don't know how long, Matias, you were trying to persuade him, but it was, I think, 2018 or so it started, 3 years or something.
3 years.
And it takes, and once you get the commission, then it's in the pipeline, as it were. But there are other books that come out first, and so it takes a long time. And in the case of my book with Bloomsbury, it took 12 months, a full 12 months before you could, having submitted the manuscript, to see the actual final result, which of course makes it extremely challenging. Not only have you got to be able to predict in advance that AI was going to have a huge impact, and we could see that, but convincing publishers is another kind of question. But also, you were always caught up with the problem of a technology which, according to Moore's law, or the law of diminishing, what is it? I forget the term that Ray Kurzweil uses now. But basically, it's exponentially, it's speeding up. How do you keep pace with that? And of course, the obvious challenge was the fact that right after these books were published, then diffusion platforms emerged and would have given us a very different set of illustrations and so on. So how can the publishing world even keep track of this kind of world? I wanted to basically sort of throw that out there as a kind of question to everyone. So I'd like to invite Wanyu and also Immanuel to join in and to kind of offer some thoughts about the challenges of even writing books in a culture where things are so instantaneous, where social media can, for free, kind of publish these things. What role do books play in the context of that? So I don't know if maybe I could ask Wanyu first of all, because you were the first ones to publish, and in fact, in many ways, so ahead of the game. I know that in China, you guys were more alert to AI after the famous Sputnik moment of Lee Sedol. The whole of China woke up to AI. But how did the reception go to the book, and what are the limitations of publishing? Maybe I could just ask you first of all, Wanyu.
Yeah, actually, after the Li Sedong and Ke Jie, the also Chinese Go player, just fight with the AlphaGo Zero. Afterwards, the entire China was let's say, shocked again by the also involved or like this new model of AI, the reinforcement learning. And people were thinking, is there any other application possible for other fields, not just for the Go games? So a lot of fields, specialists, scholars were talking about, can we try to think how can AI work in other fields? So actually in 2018, there's some publisher came to us, were asking, can you guys write a book about AI in architectural fields? And we were thinking, yeah, we are planning to, because we accumulated quite a lot of knowledge about AI and architecture during our startup working, because our company is from day one, we were working on those algorithm models and the data application and the design tools. So I think at that moment is what was quite let's say smooth to go through this procedure, because people are demanding to having this kind of a material to read. They would love to know what AI can do with other, let's say, the disciplines. So yeah, that was the easy part. But the difficult part was to get all the resources, materials, especially the images be authorized. So yeah, that's our first book. So it took some time to finish it. And we redraw a lot of diagrams, also our own diagrams. So that might make this easier, but those images, especially from, I don't know, like a 70s, and those images, we really need that, then we need to buy those images. That took a long time to require for those authorizations. But indeed, the book was quite popular, and actually our first copy of 2020, it was an internal copy of just 500 copies. It's all sold out within a week or so, because we kind of have this book with our launch event at in Shanghai. And people were like sharing this book online. They borrow to each other because this book is so limited. They borrow this book to each other, saying, "Can I borrow this book for a month and I can pay 100," something like that. It was so funny. But this thing is also encouraged us that people really would love to learn something about it. So we took seriously to go publish with the big publisher, the Tongji University Press. Yeah, then the real book came out. It was a fun story, but our team really worked 3 years on this book. So yeah, it took a lot of time. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Wanyu. That. I mean, I think that's a very fascinating background. Not the same as other people, I guess. I mean, certainly not in terms of the English-speaking world, but maybe, and it somehow reminds me also, just as an aside, I think the way your book has, taken on a life, a bit like John Fraser's famous book, that it's no longer in print, but people are passing it around in PDF forms and else and so on, and actually remains kind of incredibly timeless in a kind of strange way. Immanuel, I mean, Singapore is an interesting kind of country, because it's kind of like it's Chinese speaking and English speaking, so you are both engaging with this kind of Chinese world, but also kind of very much westernized in many ways. And I'm just wondering, I guess that given the kind of the number of Chinese speakers and so on, you must be playing Go players there as well, that you, in some senses, would have been alert to all this, a bit like China, or at least alert to the potential of AI, more so than maybe some of the Western countries. Maybe you could give some background to what your experience was in Singapore of the kind of reception to these ideas.
Right. Thanks, Neil. In fact, many years ago, someone from Tsinghua asked me to write a book on processing. I mean, early days in Chinese. And yes, it's true that we are bilingual, but we're not exactly perfectly bilingual. So I've got some problem just, doing the draft and all that. And in the end, I didn't do it. So there is, yes, it's quite interesting now that you mentioned. We're kind of always, aware of what's happening. In fact, we have some proper exchange program with China University, like with Zhejiang University, which is kind of connected to the Alibaba Research AI Lab. And we're doing actually two projects together currently with the Zhejiang University. So in that sense, the climate is a bit different. It would be most academic would not be able to write in Mandarin, write in Chinese in proper ways that's publishable. So that's the problem. Maybe I can share a bit about the issues that I myself struggled with my book. So originally, it was to be a physical book, and it was, again, the targeted audience was for the students. So we have kind of a limited, numbers that's being printed, but in the end, there was huge demand, and well, at least from the outside world, I got people asking. I mean, I think you asked me as well. Like Alyssa asked me, like, how on earth do we get this book, right? And then there was this whole process of creating an e-version of it, because I was aware that the delivery part of it was also quite messed up. I think Matias got it, but he took quite some time to get it arrived in the US or Australia, I don't know. So in the end, the e-version appeared, and that also took some time because the typesetting and all that, the graphic designer had to deal with some errors, and so that took a few number of months, and eventually it's out, which is great. The other thing about the speed of publication, I mean, unlike you guys, I mean, Neil and Matias, you guys have been published a lot. I'm not very good at that. And so in a sense that book came out of, like, wasn't planned, and then it turned out to be among the first book in AI and architecture. But again, I agree with what Wanyu was saying about within the research lab in the academic world. I mean, I have quite a number of research going on, funded projects, and on the one hand, it's also quite difficult to get things out because I have layers of like, non-disclosure stuff that I would have to go through different levels of approval to get it out. And getting it out as a paper is actually easier, right? Because it's not kind of a whole chunk of stuff going out. But that would take time also. So this is the other bottleneck for, I think, for academics doing research in this field where it's moving so fast. I mean, actually, there's a lot of stuff that New and Matias, you guys have not seen before, just that I can't get it out, right? And therefore, it can never be included anywhere, at least in the public domain, until the project has fully been signed off. So that's the problem. The other problem is, as you say, since this summer, things are moving so fast. One wonder, does it make sense anymore to publish print when next thing you have a new kind of even more advanced diffusion models, and then what do we do, right? No one's going to buy the book that is to be out. That is something that we have to reckon with.
Maybe I could ask Matias to kind of maybe add some comments to this conversation.
Yeah. I mean, my experience was really different with publishing the neural architecture book. I have to admit that I think I wrote to 20 or 25 publishers suggesting the book, and every single one was like, "What? AI, the architecture? Who cares?" Yeah, because this was all pretty much before it started to become a thing, so to speak, right? So it was rather hard to find a publisher for the book. Ultimately, also, it was funded by the university because these are publishers who are asking for funding. This is like the general model in English-speaking countries, and it's getting more popular also in German-speaking countries, that you have to basically pay to publish a book. So it was not so easy. The same like with the AD, for example. Neil mentioned that before. It took me 3 years to convince them to do an AD on AI. Yeah, this was all because it was a little bit like, it was 2018, 19, 20, maybe. I think at the end of 19 or 20, I got the contract for the book. It took a while to put it together. And actually it was supposed to be published already fall last year, but with all the supply chain problems and transport problems, it was delayed. I mean, you could see that literally on the Amazon page, how the announced date was always changed to later by the publisher, I guess. So this is the world we live in. I mean, the pandemic and all things, the pandemic disturbed things. But on the other hand, which I think is really funny, is that the majority of the books that we presented today are all basically pandemic projects. They were all done and written and published almost more or less during the pandemic. So this changed really a lot of things in the way how we can do books. The question, why do books, I think is an important question, especially when people ask about the fast turnaround of things these days. I think it's still crucially important to document this and also to voice our ideas as architects, not only in terms of what the technologically we can do, because these things are going to change very fast, but what it means theoretically, philosophically, aesthetically, like all these areas of considerations for our discipline that are maybe outside the pure technological things, because purely technology documentation is going to be outdated quickly, but this was always the case. This is nothing new. Yeah. But if you really start to think about through the problem of what it means architecturally in terms of how we generate space, how we use space, how we perceive space and so on, like really crucial basic architectural questions, you still can, cast them onto paper, and they will have their value also in the future, because every Instagram posting that we do today is probably not going to be readable in 30 years from now.
Thanks, Matias. I mean, a couple of comments. One to say, and I want to invite Lev Manovic in a second, is to say that I think from experience of publishing, and I think I publish books. That's what I unashamedly do. I'm not very good at getting grants and other things, but I could do a lot of books. I won't say how many. But one thing about publishing you have to realize is really publishers are not necessarily interested in culture or theory or design. They want to sell books, right? You've got to. This is kind of the logic behind everything, and you've got to be able to find a space that they think people are going to buy. And it's all based on that. It's quite surprising when you put in a submission, you know, it's all about the number of pages, number of color prints, number of, and so on and so on. And of course, it helps if you've got some funding for that. Actually, my book was published without I didn't have to put any funding into it. But I deliberately brought down the cost, so it's £11 or whatever, which means that not so many color images and so on. But it's really basically a kind of financial sort of package. I just want to also kind of say that, you know, to my mind, it's interesting. I've often thought about this, you know, why books are still popular, even though, frankly, you do better with a PDF because you can search in a PDF for words, right? You can't do that in a book. There's an index maybe, but it's not so easy. And why are they so popular? I guess my thoughts go back, and this is my personal view, but when I was a student at Cambridge, we could take books out from the library for 10 weeks, right? But you had to get them back in. And I had to kind of like after 10 weeks, every time I get them back in, I felt that I was losing the knowledge when I handed the book back. And to have a book, you somehow feel that you've got it. It becomes you've got the knowledge. And it becomes also a kind of, I would say, fetish object in the sense that it's interesting how when you see someone interviewed on television, they just published a book, they'll put the book on a bookshelf behind them and show their book display as though that's a sign of what they know and so on. So it becomes a kind of curious thing. It's both a kind of fetish object, so you feel like you've got that sort of knowledge, but also a visual expression of something. And I think from that point of view, I don't think books will totally die out, but they might have more of, let's say, an ornamental capacity than anything else. I recall the famous book by Gilles Deleuze, What is Philosophy, which nobody understood, but everyone had a book, What is Philosophy, on their bookshelf to kind of show that they were kind of interested in Deleuze and so on. So it's great. Just how Lev Manovich is also here today. Lev, of course, is going to be part of our series in a couple of sessions' time. He is famous as not only the leading, I guess, media art theorist in the world, but also for publishing on AI and aesthetics. Lev, I'd like to welcome you to ask your question. Great to see you. Can you unmute yourself?
Sorry, yeah, I'll unmute, but remain invisible.
Okay.
First of all, it's a fantastic session. All I wanted to do is to add to this amazing discussion a bit of my own experience, because I have published 15 books, but I also made my whole career since '93 by putting everything I write online. Had this experience. So in 2017, right, I published a book online, so self-published, just PDFs, Instagram and contemporary image. So the negative side, right, is, you know, because it's self-published, I didn't get any reviews. The positive side is that it got like, I don't know, 30,000 or whatever downloads on Academia.edu, and it was translated and published as a paper book in Italy and Japan. So eventually it became a paper book. So now I'm trying to do something similar with collaborator, writing also yet another book about AI, aesthetics, psychology, neuroscience, design. And we've been publishing chapters, one chapter at a time, also on my website in Academia.edu. Once we publish all the chapters, we will simply take it to a normal publisher. As I said, I don't know if we'll take it. So maybe I can't take it to MIT Press, but I could probably take it to somebody. So I simply want to say, yes, if you want to publish the book, and it's important for your academic, right, academic sort of steps, right, academic appointments, whether it's, you know, Cambridge or MIT or Harvard Press, yeah, then struggle and publish it. But if you're really desperate, right, to get your ideas out as soon as possible, one possibility is to, right, put chapters as PDFs or even put short sections on Facebook, you know, and then after it's done, you know, when published. So now it's, you know, again, it's an experiment, right? Not many people are doing it, but it is possible, I think, to do. So that's all I wanted to say. And that's all.
Thanks, Len. We've got a couple of kind of not necessarily questions, but more comments in the YouTube channel. Maybe I'll just read those out. AI architecture. The technology might be moving too fast for classic publishing methodology. Even Twitter accounts and YouTubers have difficulty to follow what the recent pace in image generation is. Maybe before mentioning the second comment that's made, maybe I'll just throw that out as a thought. I mean, for sure, just keeping pace with things is quite a challenge. And what I would say personally is maybe it's easier to be there at the beginning before the kind of deluge of all these kind of comments. When it becomes almost impossible. I also think that's one of, sorry, as another comment is that actually in terms of let's say modernity, I think the first people to comment on modernity, people like Walter Benjamin and Adorno and Siegfried Krakow and Georg Simmel, really saw it with a certain clarity and insight that maybe is lost in us today. So maybe at this very moment when it kind of comes across, we can glimpse very clearly what it's going to be, but I think it's going to get infinitely more complicated. Does anyone want to comment on that question about Twitter accounts and YouTube? I mean, it is, I mean, things are rapidly moving, it's fair to say. In the space, I mean, I just maybe want to pick up on a comment that was made by Angelica Poncia, who's here with us today. But yesterday, when she was just talking about MidJourney had introduced some new feature, and all of a sudden, it has changed the kind of the name of the game in terms of MidJourney. So almost daily, things are changing. Maybe when you can, maybe from a different perspective, maybe in China, I guess you've got WeChat, but you're still very much, there's a very lively social media platform.
Yeah, WeChat is definitely the one. And we also did a diffusion model with more architectural settings and data sets and algorithm parameter adjustments. And we did a chatbot in the WeChat. So people can use it and text in Chinese, and then the machine will generate some images for them, and then can select some of those and to post it. And WeChat is the most popular channel to share knowledge, let's say, with the link of the posters, or just posting your own. It's a little bit like Twitter. You can just post your ideas, and you can also share link with the others. So I don't know about the way of reading today. People are really like pixelized, or they don't really read the book. To be honest, people are more reading like a chapter. There's texts with the links. And also watch the videos and like the TikTok. Even in China, there's one called Bilibili. Yeah, you guys know, because we are on live with Bilibili. And there are some people really trying to read the book and to explain the book with their wording and their actions. And they're recording this video and they share this on Bilibili. So people don't need to read the book, but they can, they can listen to or watch this video to understand the entire book or each chapter of it. So maybe this is a new way to share knowledge. I don't know. And we were also thinking, I mean, with this book, we're also thinking maybe we can do a kind of a similar thing. We can talk to the audience on live, or we're recording it. Each of the chapter we talk the story behind it. By oral language, not by texts. But maybe this is the easier way for the younger generation to get this done. Yeah.
I mean, just one comment about that is that of course we're actually competing with books as it were right now. I think all of the podcasts competes, and the publishers are actually quite nervous about publishing anything that is already online because it's published. But it struck me that actually I try to argue. I'm hopefully going to be publishing some of our Doctoral Consortium sessions, and I said, well, but once you've tidied up and edited it, it's a very different thing. I described it as being a bit like going into a hairdresser's with completely unkempt hair and coming out sort of looking trim. But it does take a lot to publish. I personally think that actually they go hand in hand. You have one and the other. So it's a bit like getting a certificate for doing a Digital Futures workshop, right? And you've got evidence of it. You've got it there. So maybe those things don't work against each other. I'd like to. We've got questions from Matias and Lev. I'd like to ask Matias for his question. Maybe I can ask Immanuel also about this, and then go on to Lev's question. Matias.
I mean, what I would like to say is that apart from the aspect of documentation of a process or idea that you can put in a book, there's also the aspect of the person using the book providing a specific amount of attention, because reading needs attention, it needs focus, it needs a longer focus span. It's not for short attention span. The social media are of course more geared towards quick short messaging, quick short ideas throwing out there. But I think that that's basically the main difference between a book and what you see in social media is really the possibility to engage with a topic on a more serious level. If you ask me, it just demands more from you. A book demands you to pay attention. A TikTok video can run on the side and you don't need to pay attention if you don't want to. So in that extent, this is the one thing. The other one is that I'd mentioned it before, is longevity of content. I mean, what is more long living than a book? I mean, we still have Palladius and Palladius books and everything. So books are something that can document a specific idea in a current context. Yes, it is speedy, but it also can conserve that on a long term. When we're all dead, those books are still going to be there. Probably those survive longer than buildings occasionally, than built buildings. So this is how I see books, as something that is a storage for ideas that we as a generation or group of people are generating.
I completely agree with that. I actually made that comment in a few of my books that even though they might soon get out of date, they are kind of time capsules in a sense, and they are documenting a certain moment in history. And I think this is what makes this session actually very interesting. It's documenting a certain moment also in the publication of books. Immanuel, would you like to sort of comment on these?
Yeah, sure. I was thinking about Matias and Neil, your optimism about the book being this long-lasting artifact. So in response to what I saw on the YouTube comment, this NFT, right? I mean, theoretically, it should be minted, right? Then it will supposedly last forever. And I've seen people like, minting PDFs. And so this may make sense. The other thing that I'm considering is we spoke about the inability of books to have multimedia, like you can't play the video and so on and so forth, right? And I think in that sense, that this online book may make sense. Like you co-author books with like-minded people, and it can exist on web pages where you could then, just like a Jupyter notebook, right? I mean, the Colab notebook, right? You could actually look at it, run it. You can kind of co-author it, and eventually it evolve into something else. And since there is a versioning system, we could still have multiple snapshots of the moments, and that's, in that sense, it kind of is a better medium. But I think the book is always nice because it's more like an artifact to me. It's nice to have it, right? There is this situation where people just, they may buy the ebook, but they may end up also and often to buy the actual book as well if they really like it, to keep it somehow. So there is this element to the kind of tangibility of physical book as well.
No, I completely agree with that last comment. Daniela has a comment in the chat. Daniela, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, sure. So this has been great. Thank you, everyone who's here and presented. So I'm thinking about when hyperlinks came online and, reading really changed to a nonlinear activity, something that the term writerly reader was applied to a long time ago. And I'm wondering if you guys can discuss that a little bit, like how books have changed in terms of permitting nonlinear reading, or in a type of indexing or something that would allow someone not to just skim because of short attention span, but literally skim because they want to reconstruct the logic of how they're reading something.
Does anyone want to respond to that? I thought it was interesting that Matias literally skimmed through the book to give you an overview. One thing I would say about books is actually, in a sense, that's what you do when you go to a bookshop. The first thing, it's a kind of a series of steps. The book has to capture your attention. It's got to have a title and a cover that really, jumps out at you and think, oh, that's interesting. Then you pick it up and you skim through it. You don't actually read it. You've got no clue, but you can see, oh, that looks interesting. And then you buy it and then you sort of read it. So I think it's a series of kind of steps. And I guess there are different sort of modalities in which we operate today. And I would say one thing is I think architects are incredibly visual creatures. Now, you could produce a book like Learning from Las Vegas, and I'm always very critical about it because I think it's completely vacuous, but it's full of images, and that's the quintessential architectural book. Plus, it's got the most incredible title, so you're dealing with a kind of it is a kind of a cultural sampling to some extent. Does anyone want to comment on Daniela's point?
Maybe I can do a couple of things. I mean, we are talking here about two very different contexts, like one being the physical artifact of printed ink on paper, which does not allow hyperlinks, right? And then on the other side, the PDF online version of it that might allow you to create hyperlinks. I think in both cases, actually, the human mind is clever enough to figure out how to read the book. Or even, like, for example, in my case, I can say that each chapter is a closed story. So you don't have to read. It's not like a novel where you have to start at the beginning and you have to go to the end to understand it entirely. You just can pick out something. And I very deliberately, for example, used very evocative chapter titles or subtitles that will capture your imagination or provoke you to just read that part, right? When I see what it means to be a pixel. Oh wait, what does Matias mean with that? I don't know what he means, so I want to read it. Yeah. So the idea, I guess that those things like this creating books that are maybe more compartmentalized elements that can be fused together to like Lego stones that actually create the book might be, in my case, at least I can say that it might be an effect of being almost like growing up with hyperlinks. Yeah, because if you read text online, that's exactly what it means. You can actually continue reading outside the context of that one PDF. And my hope is that people, through the way the book is structured and also through the way how it's using, for example, references, might go deeper into the topic. The references in a book are more like hyperlinks, honestly, right? Because they actually are going to guide you to other sources that might enrich your knowledge about the topic. Does that answer your question somehow?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was trying to get to. I remember some books, this is not so much now, but maybe 15 years ago, there were a lot of books published that very self-consciously kind of indexed every paragraph or every line, with words in the margin, etc. And that was a very interesting way of physically hyperlinking a book. But I think what you said, Matias, is right on. Thank you.
I wonder whether they're going to be a series of kind of complementary modalities in which we're going to be operating. I think there is a certain discipline in terms of, these kind of social media things. I'm not on Twitter, but I think the idea of actually being able to express things aphoristically, a bit like Wittgenstein, the world is all there is actually quite a discipline, an important discipline. But I already do this actually in some ways, operate in different kind of ways, in the sense that, I've got copies of books where I've got the physical book, but if I want to search, I go to the PDF. And actually what's interesting also is the fact that actually, in the sense that almost because of everything going online, almost like you could look at the age before, I don't know, 1997 or something, as being a kind of almost like the dark ages, because you don't have PDFs of this or anything, and therefore they're kind of not very accessible. Whereas if they are, since then they are. So there's a whole history that existed, that was there, but we don't really pay attention because the internet gives us a certain account of things. We've got a whole series of other colleagues here who from a variety of different backgrounds, and I would encourage them to also ask questions. I also would encourage those who are watching on Bilibili and YouTube to send in your questions, and we can refer to them here. Do we have any questions from the audience with us at the moment? Maybe I'll just left. Do you want to read out your comment, or shall I read it out, the one in the chat?
Well, okay, I can say something if it's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So, as some of you, I have been for over 30 years, following the development of computer technology, its effects on culture, and I noticed that if you follow things for a long time, you see these long-term trends, and you realize that like 90% of today kind of computer technology has been developed by 1972, right? When neural networks first appeared in the late 50s, were theorized in a book by Ukrainian mathematicians in 1962, right? But of course, the recent developments in speed of processors and in RAM, right, turn quantity into quality. So while the networks have been around for decades, suddenly they're performing very well. So I was trying to spend yesterday a few hours trying to understand, right, in more detail, diffusion model and CLEAP. And this led me to the original papers by OpenAI, and they mention, right, in their paper, a whole series of papers which started with this idea that you can generate kind of text, images from text. And the first paper was 1999 or 2000, and it has been maybe like a dozen of papers refining this technology, right? So it looks like to many people a sudden explosion, right? AI summer in the case of imaging, in fact, has been slowly developing for 20 years, right? So the question then becomes, how do we prepare ourselves, right? So how do we notice when something very important is now a new important idea appears in the field of AI, and it may take 2, 3, 5, 10 years before it comes to the surface and affects everybody. But not the easy question. I mean, one thing is, of course, you can skip every year online proceedings of various AI conferences, which I do sometimes, but the papers can be very technical, right? Very heavy, and and again, it's also hard sometimes from reading early paper to realize, right? There's also YouTube channel with some of 2-minute papers, where like a wonderful scientist who has the talent, right, for speaking summarizes new papers. It's called 2-minute papers, and that's what I watch. And I think we can also teach students some of our techniques as a way to at least, right, be a little bit less shocked, right, when things appear. And the last thing I want to say, right, so most creative people, including architects, react to new technologies when we develop to a point where we become visible to everybody, like MidJourney, Stable Diffusion, DALLE-E. So we have to prepare ourselves and the students to anticipate, right, what's going to come first. So what's going to come after this diffusion model idea, right? What's going to come after this interface where you type text, right? And again, educating, I think, our students to tell them, take computer science classes, take AI classes, right? Look at the papers and AI conferences, and get a sense of longer trajectories, so you prepare for the future as opposed to always reacting, to what the industry kind of puts in front of us. Sorry, I hope it was not too long, but that was my comment.
No, that was great, Lev. I guess that the issue, of course, I mean, I've been at conferences where people will say, yeah, but we were doing this back in the 80s and 90s and things. I mean, it's to say that, well, but the deep learning revolution of about 2006 onwards, that's what transformed everything. And that's largely to do with kind of improvements in computing power and use of the cloud and so on and so on.
Maybe I can just add one quick thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was very quickly. So I was reading with all these papers, right, and skipping reading and trying to understand what was the crucial moment. And it seems like the crucial moment was around 2017, when somebody realized that, in contrast to the typical machine learning, right, where you basically have to show a computer all the labeled examples, and when the computer would recognize these examples, somebody realized that you can just simply dump, right, millions of web pages and can use this raw data to teach the computer, right? So in a way, it's called self-supervised learning, and this is what led to this revolution. But it took me quite a while to trace this idea. So it also means that perhaps in the future, right, the computer will be able to learn from millions of images, and maybe a computer will be able to learn from millions of architecture plans or 3D models without having us to label examples. So maybe something like this will be coming. That's all.
Yeah, I guess my interpretation, of course, in many ways of interpreting this was it was the ImageNet competition in 2012 where Geoffrey Hinton's team, showed how incredibly quickly they could start and efficiently recognizing images in terms of the visual domain, shall we say. But I was just thinking, in a way, it's it reminds me, because we interviewed John Fraser over the summer, and he was a real pioneer. And actually, it's quite challenging to be a pioneer because they didn't have any of these things. So he was trying to do what we call interactive design before it was even called that. They had no Arduino in those days. And I think it's really kind of challenging. But at the same time, to go back to John Fraser and to go and see how, out of his discussions with Gordon Pask, there was from cybernetics to interactive design, there is a kind of trajectory there. It's absolutely fascinating to go back in history to go and look at that particular kind of moment. But I do think he was struggling with a lack of computing power in his day. Felice Grodin has a question. Felice is a candidate on the FIU DDes, a GSD candidate, a graduate, and also an adjunct professor at FIU. Felice.
Yeah, hi, Neil. Fascinating presentation, everyone. So thank you. Just a quick question. I mean, I don't know a lot about publishing, but I was able to be involved with a new, I guess you would call it, metazine publication, which is co-edited supposedly by AI. And I'll put the link in the chat when I'm done. But I'm just curious if any of you had thought or have thought about that form of publication, which is kind of a Web 3.0 type of approach, which is something that could obviously be updated more so in real time, which is something that seems to be coming up often, is the lag time of paper publication. Thank you.
I just want to make a comment, that is, in terms of generated by AI, there's a chapter in the book, and I forget the name of the book now, Matias mentioned it, about creativity that was actually generated by AI. You only find out about it afterwards. But one thing I found about I've been teaching the theory of AI in my classes for some time, and about, was it 3 years ago? 4 years ago maybe, and I had all these essays on AI, and I thought, why is this? And they were really good. And I actually was quite convinced that they'd been generated by AI, or at least I was suspicious, shall we say. Well, this semester, I got an essay generated by AI. Well, rather, it was a movie, in fact. It was I do a session where they do a Black Mirror episode. And this particular student managed to generate something, text. Then he used it as the first AI, used another AI to translate it into kind of human-like expression. So it sounded incredibly convincing, and then used a diffusion platform to generate images from the text. So we had these 3 levels of AI. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that all the academics here should be warned that in the future, everyone will be getting essays that will be generated by AI. That'll be the challenge. Matias, do you want to add something to that?
That is already happening, my friend. That's not in the future, that's already here.
I'm saying.
You
That's
can,
what I'm saying.
you can train a neural network on text. I mean, I recently made a fun project where I trained a neural network on Ernest Hemingway and tried to figure out whether it can actually create a text that at least sounds like Hemingway. Yes, it can, absolutely. So papers are getting probably already generated by AI already now, but there's one caveat to it. It cannot generate anything new. So it will create language that sounds interesting and compelling and so on, but it will not contain any new idea in it. And I think that's the more challenging aspect of AI.
Oh, actually, I want to add something on that, Matias. I think AI can do something new. Through our practice in the design tool, we found out AI can try to figure out what's the possibility on the let's say if it's on the site. And this possibility, maybe people never think about it, but AI try by itself. And with the reinforcement learning to add on the rewards time and time again, it will find the good results that we as the people architects or human architects, we never thought about. So this is something new to us at some point.
Can I add something to this? Because I agree with you. Yes, that's possible that it comes up with something different or exciting or something we didn't think about, but that does not mean it's new. The term new is a very difficult area of consideration because, like, for example, Margaret Bowden differentiates between personal innovation and historic innovation, right? So where she describes that, for example, maybe you can invite the wheel, invent the wheel, yeah, and it's going to be exciting and new for you, yeah, because you didn't know the wheel before, but for everyone else on the planet, it wouldn't be something new. Or the other one around is the historical innovation, which would things like Albert Einstein's theory of relativity or Newton discovering the laws of physics. That are things that are historically new because they're new to everybody. And this happens very rarely. And because AI basically interpolates or sometimes interpolates between known data points, it can show us things that are interesting and different and maybe innovative to us in the latent space between existing data points. But it was always there. We just didn't see it. Do you understand what I'm trying to say with that?
Yes, I understand what you mean. Yeah, I kind of agree with that because if the element is not existing in the AI system, it cannot create something related to it or just reveal the undiscovered thing. Yeah. Thank you.
Neil, can I respond to?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. So this is what I thought until last month. So reading these papers of AI scientists who are creating, all right, AI image synthesis systems, and you can also see it in their videos. Like the whole focus of this research, like the reason it's getting so much attention actually within the AI community is not because the images are beautiful, but because they're claiming that the systems can generate new things which you never saw before, right? So for us, it's interesting we can generate beautiful images of architecture. For them, it's interesting that we can say, okay, make an image of a bear riding a motorcycle on the moon, and you get something like this, right? So from technical linguistic, let's say, point of view, the system, we went beyond classical machine learning, where in fact it was true, but we can never generate anything new. So we claim that we can. Whether these generations are interesting from a larger cultural perspective, that's a different story. But I just want to say that, like, I don't think we can assume this anymore. This was true up to maybe 2 years ago, and now I think things are a bit more difficult, and I think it's an open question, maybe we can generate new things or not. So.
Well, I mean, I just to follow up from that, I mean, I think that one thing that became clear, and this is Daniel Bolojan's sort of work, he distinguished between what you could do with style GANs, where you're operating in a kind of limited search space, or when you could start kind of using systems that paired off different effectively bred. So cycle GANs would be an example. His early work was on the Sagrada Familia, which of course existing building, but he used to kind of walk through a forest and map the two off against each other. You can certainly do this incredibly easily with these diffusion platforms. I mean, I always put something in as a kind of a bit of grit in the oyster, as it were, to generate the pearl, which is something completely different in the prompt. That of course you've never seen, I don't know, Zaha and a frog before, or something like that, or whatever, or a design by Zaha and a frog, or whatever it might be. And I use orchids a few times, and so that's extrapolating. It's actually opening up possibilities. You're breeding, and therefore it really quite a lot could be developed. I just want to mention, I put something in the chat that maybe could be passed on to the YouTubers and those watching on Bilibili, and that was an endless conversation between Slavoj Žižek and Werner Herzog, which is actually really quite extraordinary. I've only listened to about 3 or 4 minutes of it, but it goes on forever, and it just kind of points to the possibilities, I guess, in a way. You know, as educators, I mean, there are many reasons why I think as educators we have to be aware of this. We're teaching, students who are going to be out there when this thing is happening. But, I think we really got to be aware of the fact that it's going to be a complete game changer in terms of educational methods. And I think a lot of academic colleagues are resistant to all this, but things are going to change. That's why I'm saying the warning about getting AI generated images. I mean, I don't know what's happening. I'm not teaching studio this year, but whether to what extent we had these discussions, but to what extent we're getting these diffusion platforms creeping into the design studio. Levi, if you've got your hands up again, is that another question? Or yeah. Also, Felice, you were going to. Oh, sorry, you asked the question.
Can I make a quick comment about newness?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, it's true that the training set is there and you train it, and therefore you are just interpolating and something new. But I mean, there's nothing stopping us from. I mean, every time you train the model is different, right? So in a sense, I mean, every epoch is a new model with a new weights, and therefore, in a sense, there are different latent spaces. And in that sense, newness can exist not just within different latent spaces, but also between. I mean, there are now ways to have 2 latent spaces being kind of aligned, so you can interpolate in 2 different spaces. So there are newness that could come out of this, well, I suppose, technical solution, or rather than always saying that because you have the same data set, no newness will come out of it. But of course, again, newness is dependent on the reference frame, right? So if for Wanyu in the Xkool scenario if the task is to solve this particular problem, and it go beyond what's expected within that framework, then it's new. Yes, then it's new for that reference frame, and to someone else it's not new, which is fine. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to add something, because when we're trying to do the design through the AI tool, there's a principle that we have a kind of a components or let's say flat or kind of a pool, and this pool is the minimumist elements, and the AI is trying to mix those things together through the data sets. So it will create something among those data sets. But if there's something we are not really familiar with, we could call it new, and it's out of our expectation. In this context, it is. But if in Matias' context, if this element is not existing, is a pool yet, and it cannot create something not be presetted. So this is my understanding.
I mean, yeah. Just to add something, because I think what we should not underestimate is how we humans interpret what we are getting out of the neural network, right? I mean, it's like technically speaking, what I was saying before about the interpolation between known data points is not able to create anything new. That might be technically true, but on the other hand, I might agree actually with Immanuel and you, Wanyu, that for you as the user, seeing that result might inspire you to do something new. Yeah, and I think that's the point. That's a large point of this whole conversation on AI and architecture, in my opinion, is to understand that the machine itself might not be doing as much as we think it does, but it's a lot about the interpretation of the human mind of the results getting out of the process. That inspires us to think, oh, that's interesting, that's new, that's different, that's provocative, that's innovative. Like if all those things come to bear and inform our architectural project, it's a benefit, I would say.
I mean, just in terms of Margaret Bowden's kind of 2 definitions of well, the many different creativity she has, but between the personal one and the historical one, I'm never convinced by that. I mean, I think that what's going on to what we've seen today with different individuals working on, I mean, the fact that Immanuel didn't know that Wanyu was been working on a particular topic, it doesn't make it less important. So whether you know about it or not, you don't really, it's very difficult to make that distinction that she makes. Bhavleen has got a question. Bhavleen.
Yeah, so just thinking through what Matias, you were just saying, and also what Wanyu has been discussing through her discoveries and through her work as a design studio, and it just keeps me wondering that maybe what we need to think, or maybe what we need to look at AI is also what kind of a manifestation of a book or a series of work and authorship of the book would the AI kind of be generating if it were to generate a book. And maybe it would be also looking at maybe we could be also looking at a future where the structure of the book and the way we read the book, the way it's been authored and the way it's been written is also quite different. And maybe we need to be looking at that that kind of manifestation or the version of the book as well. The second kind of reflection that I wanted to also talk a little bit about is what Daniela was talking about. And what's interesting to see is that in some of the recent conferences, there is a shift in which a paper or a publication is written. There are smaller versions of something called as work in progress paper and field notes that's coming out. So maybe that's the way we need to kind of restructure our conferences, talks, and the timeline in which the tools are changing and the timeline in which we are publishing as well. Maybe a much shorter version of ideas will come together just the way the tools are developing. Maybe we need to also look at ways in which we could put the work out there and put the thoughts out there. And of course, conferences and talks that happen and new ideas happen and the discussions start to happen in these talks and conferences. So I don't know if maybe Matias or Wanyu, if you would want to kind of reflect through your work on these things.
Maybe, well, I think just what make one comment. I do think the publishing industry needs to be more alert to these things. I mean, certainly there's a difference between publishing a book in China, which can be done in a few weeks, frankly, and publishing a book in the West, where it takes a year. You know, and I think that's quite significant. I've also had a problem. My first ever book on digital design, Designing for Digital World, Wiley's insisted on publishing it in the States 4 months after they published it in Europe. And I thought, why are they doing that? You know, because frankly, 4 months is a long time in technology, so it was almost out of date. And the same thing happened with my own book, and you know, Architecture in the Age of Artificial Intelligence came out in December in the UK, whereas it was February or something in the States. And I think that I think these publishing houses need to be alert to this and get this out much more quickly, for sure. So does anyone else want to comment on Bhavleen's question?
Sorry, my Zoom crashed for a second. I could hear you. So, I mean, actually what Neil just said is very true. Like the different timelines of publication are very varying in different areas of the world. But on the other hand, it might not be, on the one hand, you have to hurry to get content out, at least so that it's not completely outdated once it's published, yeah. But on the other hand, we all know that publishing books is just a very slow medium. I sometimes compare it to building a building. It almost takes the same amount of time, yeah. Like 2-3 years, a lot of effort, change of plans, change of fabricators, or you know, things happen. The graphic designer is not ready in time. You don't have a good editor, and he changes things you don't want to be changed. So it's a very complex thing. I mean, for you guys, it looks like these things show up overnight on the shelves of bookstores, but in fact, it's quite a large process. One thing I want to add too about that process is that, at least in academia, it has a certain importance to publish books, because this is what has a lot of value in terms of, let's be honest, tenure structures, right? I mean, you have to be published several books, or at least one book, to be considered for tenure at all, right? And there is a process behind it. They have to be peer reviewed. They cannot be just any publisher, and so on and so forth. So like there's a whole mechanism behind the creation of these artifacts that go beyond the ideas that we described before about documentation and longevity and so on of ideas. Yeah. Making books is an important, in my opinion, an important process. And the more people are involved in that, the more people do it, the better we can have a larger conversation about these topics too, because they're documented, right? Does it make sense somehow?
No, absolutely. No, it does. Yeah. I just want to kind of add to that. There's also the issue with books that's become increasingly prevalent, that certain publishers charge a lot for their books, you know, and it's impossible for the average person to buy them. And I deliberately try to keep my book down to some cheap price so everyone can buy them. But that's another challenge in terms of dissemination of knowledge. They're published, or indeed, I think, you know, you get these articles published in very obscure papers, you know, in publications that really no one reads. I personally quite like the kind of book, the kind of Stephen Hawking Brief History of Time, where a scientist or some specialist writes for the general public. I mean, the same happens with, I think, Anil Seth's book on Being You. It really makes it accessible in some ways. So access has been a kind of a huge question. Pavleen, do you want to say anything back by response?
Yeah, no, Matias, I definitely 100% agree on the fact that writing the books is important, but we kind of also are talking about what would that nature of writing of the book and how would that actually affect the whole system, right? Like just taking out that writing of the book and creating that one void where you are saying that writing of the book is now generated by AI. Like, how does that affect the whole system of what academic structure of getting your tenure to getting, and everything? It does affect you as a PhD student, it does affect you as a professor, and it does affect at many different levels. So
yeah, well, I can tell you one thing about it. I mean, if we are able to create neural networks that can write text, we can also create neural networks that recognize text written by AI. So we can actually analyze that the other way around. And this is going to be like a cat and mouse game now for the upcoming decades in almost every area of creative creation. I can tell you that, right? Because, for example, we can train a neural network to be the perfect faker of originals of past masters in painting, for example. That's going to happen. You can train neural networks to understand Leonardo on a deep level, to create Leonardo sketches that never existed. And some people will come up with ideas of selling them and make a market out of it. That's totally clear. It's going to happen with an architecture. I mean, look at how many fake Sahas you see on MidJourney every day. I mean, what does that mean? Is that actually okay? Yeah. I mean, there's a German term. It's called Leichenfledderei, which is basically stealing from the dead. Yeah.
Maybe that's what it would mean to write a book, is to how well you can train the AI to be able to write it for you.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I mean, I'm not saying that it can be an enormous help creatively. I'm not banning it. I'm not saying you should ban it or anything. I don't think so. You can use these methods very creatively. Artists are showing us today how to use these methods creatively in a really beautiful way. So we can also do this as writers. Musicians are doing music based on AI algorithms, and no one is saying, oh my God, this should be banned. If it enriches human culture by things that are added on by AI, please go ahead with it. This is going to be wonderful. And this is also the chance I see for architecture. It can enrich our own culture. It can make us understand better what it means to do architecture properly instead of just boxes that house people. Yeah, so I think it's an enrichment for human culture in general. So I don't think that those things are a problem. They are an enhancement of ourselves.
Just to add, yeah, sorry. Just to add, in fact, there's this whole research area in adversarial attack, right? So given an image, even though it looks like something different from us, actually the neural network is seeing it completely differently, right? So, and these could be turned into creative process, right? Where you deliberately, like for instance, countering the algorithm, like the DALLE project, CV DALLE project, where try to confuse the algorithm. So it may, in the end, even shift the creative impulse in rather interesting ways as one interact with these systems. So if we figure out that the AI could write the whole book, I think the student probably want to get hold of that first, then the academics. If it could write it, then maybe the whole value proposition of creating text is something altogether different, like just like all art movement, right? If someone can do realistic painting, then someone just gonna do abstract painting, and everyone does abstract painting, someone gonna do something else, right? So it's kind of a evolution of creative impulses. Yeah.
Maybe just the comment I was going to make was that I once published something about the culture of the copy. I mean, I think the humans copy the whole time. I mean, the idea that somehow we're operating in a kind of neutral zone. There's a canon to architecture. You've got to do something that looks a bit like Zaha or Foster or Gehry or Rem or something. If it looks, you can't do the same, but you've got to do something that looks like it. Otherwise, it's not really considered architecture. And I mean, there's a long argument there, but I think we're always already in absorbing these impulses from outside in what we do. There's a question here from Deepti, who is very noisy where she is, so I'll read out the question in the chat. Deepti Datta is a professor in India and also on the FIU DDes. Question, regarding AI virtual books versus human experience of a book. The lines between what a human can do and what technology can do are blurring as we speak. Do we need to think about the technology versus human experience and reflect on where they intersect and where they don't? Let me read that again. Regarding AI virtual books versus human experience of a book, the lines of what a human can do and what technology can do are blurring as we speak. Do we need to think about technology versus human experience and reflect on where they intersect and where they don't? I mean, I've got an answer to that, but maybe I'll let you guys finish first. Say it first.
I want to say something because it's quite late, but I want to answer first. I think the difference between human beings like each other, we are different because we have a different experience and a knowledge. Knowledge is not about our methodology, the similarity, because the methodology always can be the same because you learn from the school, from the as Neil said, from the famous architects, the pattern. And also we have different IQs. But the most important difference is the first thing I said is the knowledge and the experience. This kind of system we can compare with the machine. If we consider the people's IQ as the machine's computational power, it's all the same to everyone. It's more or less faster or slower. So this is not an important thing. And the methodology is like the algorithms to the machine. Algorithms can be similar, can be used for everyone or in every field. But the decision, or not decision, but the most important thing which defines the differences is the data. So the data equals people's experience and the knowledge. So to answer this question, I think, we don't have to to be so different in methodologies, but the contents, that's the most important thing. Yeah, that's it for me.
Yeah, no, I would just add to that. In terms of this kind of relationship about humans versus technology, I think we have to sort of, my argument would be that for the moment at least, we need to kind of take on board the idea of how technology can be a prosthesis to what we can do, how we operate with technology. I know that's how Wanyu sees it, as kind of AI-assisted design and so on. And certainly I think in terms of MidJourney, it's really kind of showing us how lacking imagination humans are, because once you get someone with MidJourney producing something, you've got a far greater range of output, shall we say. So I think at the moment, for the moment, it's definitely that. Matias, do you want to say something?
Yeah, just very shortly. I mean, this whole concept of the blurring of nature and technology, or humans and technology, that's basically an old cyberpunk trope, something that we have been talking about for the last 30, 40 years almost. We should slowly get used to the fact that those things are happening the way they are. And I mean, the Pandora's box is open. Now the question is, what do we do with what comes out of Pandora's box? And hopefully we can turn it into something positive, interesting, productive, provocative, culturally engaging. So like there's a whole set of wonderful things that can happen when we do this. I know I'm an optimist. I know that I have also this reputation of being an optimist, but at the same time, I also try to understand what the larger implications are here. And I have no problem with technology and humanity blurring in one or the other way. This doesn't mean we're going to become immediately cyborgs that are controlled all by one specific large company or something. Again, by the way, cyberpunk trope. Read old Neil Stephenson works or William Gibson's. They're all full with these ideas. Yeah. I'm far more interested in actually what Wanyu already said before, which is how actually data and the data sets we create are massively influencing every kind of result that we do in AI. I mean, I know that in architecture, this is not a very popular topic to talk about the data sets that we are actually using, how they are generated, what it means in terms of labor, what it means in terms of ethics. Yeah. So all those aspects are really important in moving forward from this point in time to like the next 5 or 6 years, when those things are going to be massively applied in every aspect of human life. We already, I mean, as Neil and I made already an argument in the AD that we're already surrounded by AI on a daily basis. We're just not very aware about it.
I think people are getting more and more aware about it right now. I think that's a great spot on which to end the idea of a Pandora's box that has been opened. And I mean, God knows what it will lead to. I'm also aware of the kind of comment that Alan Turing made at the very beginning, and he was referring to computation. This is just, I forget exactly what the title was. This is just a foretaste of what is going to be, or a mere shadow of what is going to happen. Clearly, things are happening right now, and probably as we've been speaking, things have changed. This is certainly a Pandora's box of problems, and one I think that architects need to engage with, because it's going to have a huge impact on them. This has been a fantastic session. When I set it up, I had no idea what would come out of it, but it's been really an amazing session. I want to thank the panelists for joining me on this session today, to Wanyu He, Immanuel Ko, and to Matias del Campo. Maybe especially to Wanyu and Immanuel, because it's very, very late right now in China. It's 1:30 in the morning. Thank you so much for staying up this late. It's really, your contribution is really important. And I think it's so significant. We've got a global discussion happening here. I think this is really important. It's fantastic also to see our guests on our Zoom here, Xkool from Bangladesh and Harith from Iraq. Wonderful to see this. And thank you also for those who are have been helping to set this up in the Digital Futures team. There is a huge amount, it's an iceberg. There's a huge amount that goes on that you can't see in setting these things up. And thank you so much for them. And thank you also to those who are watching us on Bilibili and YouTube. We will be uploading this to the Digital Futures account. And I look forward to continue this discussion next week when we have Randy. We have a discussion about the AI and the office happening, which is again hugely relevant, and it's surely going to change the way the office operates. Also, we have Led Manovich joining us for the session after that, looking at aesthetics along with Aaron Hertzman. And finally, our final session is going to be on AI and the books on AI in the city. There's something new that's happening. It's a kind of Pandora's box of ideas that they've been unleashed now. God knows what's going to happen, but it's important to discuss it. And thank you so much for contributing to the discussion today. It's been a very rich and varied discussion. and see you all next week. And please don't forget about the call for the Digital Futures conference. Everything is completely free. It's very well rated in terms of research output. So please make an application. Thank you, everyone, and see you again next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.